We've got two very distinguished speakers today, and I'll just briefly introduce them. So Dr. Yoshi Kato is Associate Professor at Rikkyo University in Tokyo. Well, his list of books looks pretty hard.
You don't have to pronounce anything. It's all on the website. So.
God and the Problem of Indifference in Christoph Wittig's Anti-Spinoza. I hope you're going to keep it down at our level this evening. And then James Walters is the founding director of the LSE Faith Center and the LSE Religion and Global Society. Well, the book that I have here, 2019, your most recent book, looks a bit more
accessible.
Yeah, accessible. Loving your neighbor in an age of religious conflict. So without any further ado, I will pass over to them. So I think Kato-san, you're going to speak first.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Jason, and staff of DAIWA for organizing this wonderful event. Looking forward to have a wonderful discussion with Jim. My name is Yoshi Kato, as I was been introduced. I've been spending sabbatical year at Cambridge, Clare Hall, Cambridge, as well as LSE, and then Jim happens to be my boss, so so it'll be an interesting conversation, hopefully, tonight. So let me go through this by reading my paper. Over the past decade, the global society has been confronted with the rise of religion in the political sphere. Particularly politicians and political parties identified as far-right or populist nationalists have repeatedly invoked religion, garnering resonance among the masses. In the highly scrutinized US presidential elections, for instance, former President Trump secured a resounding support from Christian nationalism, who believe that America is founded as and should continue to be a Christian nation. In Europe, so this is the recent event, almost all the populist nationalist political parties advocate Christianity as the essential foundation of Western civilization. These parties include France's Rassemblement National, the Netherlands People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, which recently won the general election under the leadership of Geert Wilders. This is the guy. And the Vox Party, so this is Marine Le Pen from France, and Vox Party from Spain, and AfD in Germany. And in Eastern Europe, we have no problem. Take your time. Viktor Orban's Fidesz continue to hold the power in Hungary, and in Poland, Law and Justice PIS, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, despite facing recent defeat in general election, still exerts its influence as the most popular party in the country. Even in the UK, politicians advocating Christian identity played a significant role in the Brexit movement. In Japan, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who led a long-term administration from 2012 to 2020, garnered substantial support by promoting Shintoism as the foundation for the national identity, appealing to a broad spectrum of population, including the youth. Some might understand this phenomena as the revival or resurgence of the traditional religion that was considered inevitably declining in the process of modernization. However, looking at the numerical data alone, secularization appears to be ongoing, with a rapid decrease in the percentage of population affiliated with established religion. Even in the United States, where religious fervor was exceptionally high within Western society, the existence of the nones, those who are not affiliated with any specific religious groups or denominations, now constitute around 25% to 30% of the population. Moreover, in Poland, under the decade-long rule of PIS, the country witnessed a decline in the Catholic majority from nearly 90% of the population to approximately 70%, and an even lower proportion among the younger generation. Thus characterizing the recent global relationship between religion and politics merely as a post-secular So secularism is over. Post-secular religious revival may be an oversimplification. How then should we understand this? Tonight, with a particular focus on the situation in the UK and Japan, we aim to analyze the unfolding global trends and then delve into a nuanced comprehension of these developments in the respective countries. So these are the order of the section, and hopefully it won't be too long. The first section entitled Globalization's Pitfall and the Resurgence of Religion. According to traditional theory of religion, religious followers, a religious follower meant believing in specific doctrine, congregating for rituals and community, and adhering to certain standards in behavior, including attire, special attire, dress, diet, sexual conduct. And in these three things, I would call creed, congregation, discipline. Three elements are very important, right? Moreover, individuals typically inherited their religious identity within the family that practiced a particular religion, growing up and being nurtured as religious adherents. In stable society, this cultural reproduction generally followed a predetermined path, and consequently the religious population did not significantly decline as long as the overall population steadily grew or unencumbered by mass migration. So if born into a Christian family, one would grow up as a Christian, and the same applied to being born into a Muslim family. This paradigm began to shift significantly in the 1960s with an increased emphasis on individual freedom over group or familial affiliation, not only in areas such as sexuality and career choices, but also in religion. Individuals started to choose their faith based on personal preferences and needs. European youth, for example, turned away from Christian churches attended by their parents and grandparents, embracing meditation, yoga, and Zen introduced from India and Japan. While traditional Christianity did not completely fade away during this period, the forms of Christianity underwent significant changes compared to the previous generation, seeking to fulfill individual preferences and spiritual needs. This trend has accelerated further with the global penetration of consumerism. According to the Scottish sociologist David Lyon, consumerism shifts the circulation of religious knowledge from family, community, and local clergy to media, publishing, and information communication technologies. So individuals then choose creed, congregation, and discipline, those three elements, right? Based on the knowledge circulated in this way, aligning with their preference and expressing their identities accurately. Furthermore, the specific creed, congregation, and discipline that previously constituted particular religions are fragmented or combined differently to suit consumer preferences, allowing, for example, so this is a typical picture, Christians, or at least a Christian church, allowing people to practice yoga, or the Buddhists to wear a rosary, or the Japanese example, young Japanese couples getting married in a chapel. That's the most popular thing for Japanese couples to do nowadays, even though they're not really Christians, right? In such a consumer society, the decline of traditional religion and communal identity is inevitable, leading to increased diversity in values and hence heightened tension between generations and various groups. For those who can embrace diversity, this situation may seem agreeable. For them, the decline of traditional religion and communal identity may not pose significant threat, since they already are immersed in cultural diversity such as international cuisine, travels, luxurious foreign brands, thanks to globalization. This aligns with the perspective of Michael Lind, a political scientist in the United States, who referred to the urban elite benefiting from globalization. Or the same people could be named as anywheres, as coined by David Goodhart, a British journalist, describing those who can work anywhere globally. So most of you probably are these global elites or the anywheres who can work anywhere. However, for the segment unable to enjoy the benefits of globalization, according to Goodhart, these people are called somewheres. So anywheres and somewheres. Individuals restricted to working only in specific countries or regions, this presents a significant problem. The newly generated wealth eludes them, or the economic situation is never worse, and the economic situation is even worse now than before for them. And the religious and communal ties that provided connections and identity in their parents' and grandparents' generation are rapidly being dismantled. This demographic is the very group of people that has been fervently addressed by populist nationalist political figures in Europe and the rest of the world, gaining strong resonance. For this demographic in the US and Europe, Christianity holds great appeal. However, this Christianity, which has appealed to these people, does not consist of a specific set of creed, congregation, and discipline. Traditional Christianity, which encompasses these three elements, represented by the established churches and leaders such as the Pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury, now embrace cultural and sometimes sexual and gender diversity and takes a position that supports immigrants, resembling closely to the stance of the global elite or anywheres. Rather, the Christianity that resonates with those who are left behind of globalization must reinforce their nativist identity as American, British, French, Dutch, Spanish, or German. For them, this kind of religion must present the self as valuable in itself, serving as a source of identity rooted in their ethnicity, and in turn rejecting those who do not share their identity as others, most often immigrants. While different from the traditional form of religion, such religion still contains religious discourses and symbols. If you check most of these nationalist populist politicians' speech, you find a lot of religious symbols and discourses being utilized, making them a unique phenomenon in the global society. Although not a straightforward religious revival, the characteristic of linking religious elements to politics, thereby inspiring ethnic identity and nationalism, suggests that these phenomena cannot be solely reduced to politics. In this way, the relationship between religion and politics can be said to have entered a new phase as the negative impact of globalization is greatly felt by the populace. And now let me turn now to the history of religion in Japan and development of Shinto nationalism, how that connects to a bigger context that I just talked about. Considering the global situation, reflecting on the relationship between religion and politics in Japan presents a dual challenge. First, the term religion did not exist in Japan until the mid-19th century when the Western countries, through semi-coercive measures, pressured Japan to open up. Before that, various terms including shumon, so shumon or shushi, were used to connotate something like religion. For example, so there's another picture. For example, in the Edo period, the term Kirishitan shumon was utilized to denote Christians. However, these terms merely indicate difference in various Buddhist sects and their funeral rites. So therefore, they could not exactly capture the Western concept of religion. So when Western countries initially used the term religion in international treaties and in other documents, Japanese translators could not agree on one word to connotate the exact meaning. So these are some of the words that they've used: kyoho, kyomon, hokyo, seido. Try to really wrap their mind around this concept of religion. And ultimately, the new word, though the Chinese used it to connotate the truth of Buddha during Tang Dynasty in 7th, 10th century, and it died down in its use, shukyo was introduced to mean religion. Moreover, in terms of meaning, religion in the Western sense, as mentioned earlier, referred to those with a particular creed, congregation, and discipline, as well as an emphasis on internal belief of faith. Consequently, in this sense, many Japanese religions would not fit under the Western definition of religion. So Shinto in particular can be considered the epitome of this difficulty. So English explorer and naturalist Isabella Bard, for example, had written very critically about religion and Shintoism of Japan in her Unbeaten Tracks in Japan, which was published in 1880. She says that because of Shintoism, Japanese people are generally indifferent toward religion. I'm quoting her words here, making its people content with this most shadowy and barren of creeds, which neither enjoins duties nor demands sacrifices, nor holds out terrors of judgment to come, end quote. In other words, because Shintoism lacked creed, duties, and the notion of last judgment, that it was empty of, this is her word, all that to our ideas constitute religion. So the Japanese people lack a concept of religion, she thought. Nevertheless, in the effort to modernize Japan, intellectuals and high-ranking governmental officials eagerly embraced the Western definition of religion. Christian missionaries, for example, and clergy in particular, who wielded significant influence in education and in healthcare during this period, portrayed Japan as hindered in modernization due to the absence of religion, and therefore advocated Christianity as the true religion necessary in this process for Japanese people. In response, Buddhist priests such as Mokurai Shimaji sought to present Jodo Shinshu as closely resembling Protestant religion, since it rejected meaningless rituals and superstitions present in other Buddhist sects and acknowledged non-vegetarian diet as well as marriage, so it's very Protestant in some sense. Hence, Shimaji demonstrated that Jodo Shinshu sufficiently fits Western definition of religion, endowed with creed, congregation, and discipline, being able to assume the role of the true religion necessary for the modernization of Japan, and by doing so, seeking to prevent Japan from Christianization. This overall acceptance of the Western definition of religion created a great political problem, especially in relation to state Shintoism. Constitution of the Empire of Japan, promulgated in 1889, included a provision for the freedom of religion, Article 28. However, this liberty was conditional, restricted not to impede, quote, the peace and order of the state and the duties of the citizen, end quote. The peace and order of the state encompassed the national polity, or kokutai, essentially allowing freedom of religion as long as it did not oppose state Shintoism, which was now considered beyond the category of religion. This was evidently reinforced in 1890 with the issuance of the imperial rescript on education, Kyoiku chokugo, where state Shintoism centered around the divine lineage of Emperor Koso, that's the first couple of phrases, that's the divine lineage, was integrated into education. Accordingly, specific liturgical practices were introduced to the education system, such as emulating Christian worship style for emperor veneration, singing songs resembling Christian hymns with lyrics praising the emperor, revering the emperor's photograph, and vowing to the direction of imperial palace. So some of the elementary school in Meguro is actually doing this. This is, I think, the elementary school teachers vowing to the direction of imperial palace, and some students are brought as part of public education to the shrines. This state Shinto system was initially criticized by Christian and Buddhist clergy, and even by the leaders of some new religious movements, as breaching the Article 28. But the government responded by denying Shintoism as religion and claimed the state Shinto's compatibility with religious liberty guaranteed in the Constitution. So this is not religion, so therefore it's okay. It's a public duty to visit shrine, public duty to worship emperor. It's interesting logic, but during the late 1930s to the 1940s, the state Shinto system intensified, suppressing liberal, democratic, and individualistic values as seen in the publication of the pamphlet, The True Meaning of the National Polity, Kokutai no Hongi, distributed by the Ministry of Education. The pamphlet advocated the ultra-national Shintoism. As the Sino-Japanese War intensified and eventually led to the Pacific War, the book became sanctified. It was a holy book. The defeat in 1945 brought the occupation under the general headquarters of the Allied powers, GHQ, leading to the dismantling of the state Shinto system. Any influence of state Shintoism in politics, education, economy was barred. In this sense, the occupation facilitated not only the strict separation of church and state, but also the rapid secularization and even so-called Weberian disenchantment related to Shintoism. Shinto was no longer believed by the people. Post-war Japanese society saw a drastic decline in shrine visits, and hence many shrines faced financial difficulties during this period. It comes back later, but during this period. Another significant factor contributing to secularism in Japan was the rapid urbanization from the late 1950s to the early 70s, causing the decline of rural communal traditions because of the urbanization based on Shinto and Buddhist rituals. While traditional religious ties weakened for many Japanese, the urbanization also saw the rise of new religious movements, such as the Soka Gakkai, the supporting body of the Komeito, making significant strides during this period in the urban settings. The ascendancy of consumerism in Japan in the 1970s and 80s brought about further secularization of traditional religions. But concurrently, it led to the rise of consumer-oriented religions, as we talked about earlier. The fragmentation of religious symbols, discourse, and items from existing religious systems allow consumers to choose religions based on personal preferences. Religious knowledge, once transmitted by leaders and clergy of religious community, began circulating through media such as television, magazines, and the internet. As a result, Shinto amulets, omamori, temple seals, goshuin, the fortune slips, omikuji, along with various power spots, have gained popularity, particularly among the young people. Consequently, consumer-oriented religion, especially those centered around Shintoism, have surged in Japan. So this is, you see Meiji Jingu, one of the biggest and most powerful power spot. I don't know have you've been to or not, but Kiyomasa no I, it's a well by Kiyomasa. That's one of the most powerful power spots that young people visit. And or this is Tokyo Daijingu with buying amulets for fulfilling your romantic desire, right? Like I think that young people are really interested in these things nowadays. So since the Aum Shinrikyo subway attack in 1995, there has been widespread support for these consumer-friendly religious practices, even among people who usually harbor aversion toward the term religion. So they don't think this to be religion, right? Like, so it's okay for people to engage in these practices. So that last and final section, the rise of religious politics in Japan in the global era. In the period from 2012 to 2020, Shinzo Abe, who held the position of prime minister in Japan, contributed significantly to the religionization of politics in Japanese society. He sought to cancel the post-war democratic society designed by the GHQ and instead celebrated a nationalism reminiscent of the pre-war state Shintoism. Abe received support from political organizations such as Nippon Kaigi, Japan Conference, and Shinto Sage Renmei, which is a Shinto political league. Especially the latter actively influenced politics during since the 1970s, striving to establish a political system based on Shintoism. Japan, as envisioned by Prime Minister Abe with his beautiful country, Utsukushii Kuni Nippon initiative, sought to re-establish this Shinto worldview, albeit a modernized and softer version, definitely not exactly the same thing, promoting conservative policies such as anti-immigration and anti-LGBTQ. Some of the members of it's all in Japanese, but some of the members from the Suga and the Kishida administration, this is the first Kishida administration, it has changed now, but they're part of these Nihon Kaigi and the Shinto Sage Renmei. The influential role of such Shinto-centric organizations as lobbying groups was significant, with a majority of cabinet members in Abe, Suga, and even current Kishida administration belonging to these groups. However, in recent years, the group's decline in membership and its aging demographic have seemingly diminished their political impact. Particularly noteworthy is the enactment of legislation addressing concerns of the LGBTQ community in June 2023, which just happened recently, indicating the decrease in their influence within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party because they are totally anti-LGBTQ, right? Individuals dissatisfied with the liberal stance of the Kishida administration, exemplified by laws like those supporting the LGBTQ community, seem to have found new hope in a recently found political party. Officially established on October 17, 2023, the Japan Conservative Party gained momentum initially through a somewhat abrupt declaration of needing to start a new political party by best-selling author Naoki Hyakta. That's one from the left, second from the left, in September. The party's core representative and initiator Naoki Hyakta gained prominence as the author of the comprehensive pseudo-history book, I would say pseudo-history book, called Nihon Kokuki, Chronicles of Japan, published in 2018. While the book includes numerous historiographical problems and also charged with plagiarism, it praises the imperial system's perpetual lineage, Bansei Ikke, and Japan's world historical role since modern times. Despite its ideological bias towards Japanese nativism, the book sold over 1 million copies within a year, attracting significant public attention. Along with Hyakta, this political movement is led by the well-known and seasoned populist politician Takashi Kawamura. That's the guy from second from the right, and he's the current mayor of Nagoya, which, by the way, it's my own city. But love Nagoya, but I'm not quite sure about this guy. But the particular party quickly garnered attention, amassing 330 followers on Twitter within a few weeks. Given the official Twitter account of the LDP, which is the ruling party, has approximately 250,000 followers, so it's already surpassed the LDP. Its impact cannot be ignored. It has garnered attention primarily from online right-wing supporters, nettoyoku type of people who have previously supported Shinzo Abe. But it's not just that. It's wider than just a mere nettoyoku. And it also gained support of several local politicians. The party membership has quickly accumulated to 57,000 people according to the party website. So I hope that's true, but I don't know. Like, sometimes these people lie as well. Plagiarism, they do these things. But the main policy position of the Japan Conservative Party closely resemble those of populist nationalist political parties in Europe, advocating anti-LGBTQ, anti-immigration stance. Of particular note is the party's foundational Shinto-based worldview, emphasizing Japan's unique culture and national identity, sanctioned by the singular male imperial lineage and the importance of preserving these traditions. In that sense, very similar to the European counterpart, which emphasized Christianity as the foundational religion for Western civilization. Elements perceived as threat to this cultural heritage include sexual and gender diversity and the influx of what Hyakta described as the low-level ethnicities. The future political influence of this populist nationalist party remains uncertain, since the leader Hyakta recently suffered from cancer and has no political experience. Also, the relationship with a party called Sanseito, or English name is kind of funny, but party of do-it-yourself, DIY party, which is kind of strange name to have as your political party, but at least that's the name of that party, Sanseito. Another nationalist populist party founded in 2020. Sanseito already has one member in the National Diet, and this is this guy. He's still, I think he's like 40 something, still young politician, and more than 100 members in local legislature. So they're much more established than Nihon Japan Conservative Party. Since these two parties' positions are very similar, they might merge, and if so, they could gain a greater political influence. But they might also fight against one another, mutually reducing influence. However, considering the increasing societal fatigue in Japan due to globalization, there's a possibility that these parties could incorporate dissatisfied segments opposed to the liberal policies of the current LDP. They're already unpopular, and play a significant political role, similar to populist nationalist parties in Europe. It's essential to monitor developments in this regard. So, like, currently there's one election which is happening in Tokyo, Koto area, which Japan Conservative Party actually have a candidate. So result, I think, should come soon, and see if they do any good in the region. So let me conclude. It is fascinating to observe the emergence of populist nationalist political parties in Japanese politics, similar to those in Europe and the United States. given Japan's unique history regarding the relationship between religion and the politics. In Europe, as well as in Japan, this phenomenon does not simply signify the revival of past religions. However, a notable distinction exists. Unlike Europe, Japan's Shinto tradition has always deviated significantly from the conventional definition of religion. Thus, it can be argued that Shintoism, developed as it was in the pre-war Japan, is a type of religion that is easily assimilated into political structure. Even with a consumer type of religion, Shintoism is becoming much more popular nowadays. The situation is a bit different in Europe, where the established churches, I'm sure Jim is going to talk a little bit about that, churches fight against a version of Christianity espoused by the populist nationalist parties. Therefore, in the face of increasing social fatigue caused by globalization and the rapid emergence of those whom Goodhart terms somewheres, it is conceivable that individuals in Japan might seek their identity in a type of Shintoism espoused by the Japan Conservative Party and Sanseito. If that happens in a wide scale, it could potentially wield a political impact no less significant than that of populist nationalist party in Europe. So let me sum up. In contemporary politics, religion is not merely experiencing a revival of its pre-modern form. Rather, it serves as a source of identity for those whose economic status and communal ties have been significantly damaged by globalization, providing narratives and historical perspectives that draw a clear distinction between self and others. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. And I'm grateful to Yoshi for introducing me to Japan. It's been wonderful to have a colleague in our research unit asking similar questions as the ones we're trying to address about the entanglement of religion in contemporary geopolitics, but doing it in a very different context and in a different part of the world. I'm just going to make, I think, a few remarks about the British situation in order for us to try and allow as much time as we can for questions and discussion. Yoshi has described a sort of post-secular moment, a return of religion in some form in the political sphere, and in particular, a fusion of resurgent religious narratives and right-wing nationalism that appeals to populations disoriented and disenfranchised by globalization. And this is very widespread globally. One can think of examples: India, Russia, America, as Yoshi pointed out. Now, I think that we're not seeing this kind of religious nationalism in this country, and I want to say a little bit about why that might be the case. But we are seeing some phenomena that we might describe as post-secular, something that kind of bucks the secularization narrative that we thought that we were living by. And I think that there are some dangers in relation to religious conflict emerging within political life. But why no religious nationalism in the way that we've been discussing? Well, Yoshi makes the important point that this is not necessarily incompatible with decline in religious observance in the countries where it's happening. But I think secularization in this country has been happening over a longer period of time, certainly in comparison to America, and has been quite profound. So just to give you the census data, the UK census has only been asking a question about religion since 2001, so we have 3 data sets. This is 2001. On the left column is Christianity, for those of you at the back. In the middle, no religion, and on the right, other faiths. So at that point, other faiths being just under 6%. 2011, you can see that we have a drop in Christianity by 13%, an almost tandem rise in no religion, and a little growth in other faiths. And then the data we had from 2021, a continuation of those trends. The headline was Christianity for the first time less than half the population of England and Wales at 46%. And those of other religions going over 10% for the first time to 11%, Islam at 7%. So you can see that the principal trend has been a shift from people formerly identifying as Christian to now saying they have no religion. This can be read often as an intellectual rejection of Christianity. I think it's more true to say that it is the symptom of a cultural disconnection that's been taking place over a long period of time. My grandparents' generation would say that they were Christian, not necessarily because they were firm believers or regular worshippers. Church attendance in 1980 was already under 10% in this country. But rather their cultural references would have been predominantly Christian. Particularly in schools, they will have experienced worship and prayer, which has become increasingly rare, has become a point of contention. They would have had the habit of going to church at Christmas and Easter and so on. But now British culture has predominantly lost these Christian moorings and is operating more on the idea that the philosopher Charles Taylor describes as the immanent frame, where religious, spiritual questions of meaning and truth are replaced by more immediate concerns of status and material comfort and stimulation. But even against this backdrop, the post-secular moment is not irrelevant, and I want to describe that in two forms. The first is the right-hand column that we were looking at, the growth of other religions within the UK. Some well-established over centuries, like the Jewish community, others newer and more youthful, like our 4 million Muslims, over half of whom are under 19. But even these newer communities in recent years really coming of age, obviously with our first Muslim mayor of London and our first, a nice multi-faith image for you, our first Hindu prime minister. Religious pluralism is something that we can celebrate, and that's one of the things we try and do in our centre, but it also brings challenges. And much of that is linked to the way in which these non-Christian religions are unsettling some of the European assumptions about religion as essentially divorced from the public sphere. That separation been emerging since the Enlightenment, since the really the very brutal religious wars that we saw on this continent, and a move towards the view that religion is best kept out of politics and public life. But other religions and other parts of the world don't have this kind of separation. Religion is much more entangled with politics, and sometimes we see that within the British non-religious communities too. We've obviously seen it acutely over the last few months, since the 7th of October, with strong affiliations both Jews and Muslims feel with their communities in the Middle East. But in recent years, we've seen it more and more in relation to the Indian subcontinent. And you may remember summer before last, riots breaking out in the city of Leicester between Hindus and Muslims. It was partly triggered by a cricket match between India and Pakistan. Now, I don't want to exaggerate these tensions, and they're often accompanied by strong inter-community relationships at the leadership level. But these kinds of tensions are growing and reflect the way in which the local within the UK is now always connected to global patterns. The second sort of post-secular phenomenon I want to refer to is an enduring and evolving Christian presence, which the census data might conceal. Despite secularization, we still have 3 million practicing Christians in this country, and many from immigrant communities, setting up new congregations, particularly in London and other urban centres. Often these groups more overt in their faith than the traditional Church of England, which is always seen as a sort of antidote to religious enthusiasm. So there's some renewal of Christian life through immigration, but I think we also oftentimes don't see the enduring legacy of Christian hegemony, let's call it Christendom in Europe, which is still remarkably strong in this country. So the Church of England is still the single largest provider of schools educating 1 million children. It has a very active role in welfare provision through food banks and all this kind of thing. And of course, uniquely in historic Christian countries, we retained clergy within the legislature. 26 bishops sit in the House of Lords. And this, of course, relates to the fact that our head of state, King Charles, is the supreme governor of the Church of England, which I'll come back to at the end. Now, it's very easily said, and it's very commonly said, that these legacies of Christian culture are an anachronism. But I think what interests me is asking the question of why these have persisted, why they have not disappeared in ways that they have in other parts of the world. And I think that something I want to stress about the post-secular is I think it's often better understood not referring to the resurgence of religion, at least numerically, so much as speaking into a political and social climate where the ideas that we thought were going to replace religion have in some ways been found inadequate and found wanting. And so we might say that religion punches above its weight numerically, or at least religion haunts societies whose secular projects, be they liberal democratic, socialist or neoliberal capitalist, have failed to capture the imaginations of people in some ways. And I think this is a sort of phenomena that Yoshi was referring to. And this is perhaps where divisive religious narratives are in danger of creeping into British politics in a way that we've not really seen before. The culture wars bring simplistic oppositional narratives into political discourses at a time when politics no longer seems to be about big, substantive political ideas and ideologies. This is what I mean about a sort of weakening of the secular, a kind of loss of energy in some of the ideas that we thought were going to replace religion. And we've seen this in the last few days in the Rochdale by-election and in the Islamophobic remarks of MP Lee Anderson. We're seeing how a significant fault line between right and left in British politics has become support for the Jewish community and therefore Israel on the one side, and support for the Muslim community and therefore the Palestinian cause on the other. I also anticipate seeing more Islamophobic rhetoric designed to appeal to those of a culturally Christian background, if not practicing Christians themselves. And that seems like a real danger if the Conservative Party were to pivot to the right after the election. So these are where our dangers lie, I think, not so much in religious nationalism, but first, inter-community tensions, which can play into political polarizations, and second, right-wing anti-immigration rhetoric targeted at religious communities, particularly Islam. I don't want to say too much more because I want to wrap up, but I just want to reflect finally on this moment last year, the coronation, extraordinary kind of relic in a way of Christendom, the last anointed Christian monarch in the world, but combining, as you see in this picture, the modern religious diversity of Britain. And I want to conclude by just reflecting on King Charles as the head of state and as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. It is something that we could easily take for granted, the fact that we have a head of state who sees it as his job to promote religious pluralism and religious freedom for those of all faiths and those of no faith. And he says this time and again. And this is very unusual now. We have a lot of heads of state around the world using political difference as a way to leverage their power and their authority. We have the opposite, and we have him as Supreme Governor of a church, an established church, the most established in Europe, which you think might therefore fuel religious nationalism, also itself taking a lead in interfaith initiatives within communities and at a national level. Perhaps not a perfect model, but something that is perhaps a bit of a bulwark against this dangerous sort of religious nationalism. So I'll leave it there because I'm very keen to hear questions and comments from the floor.